Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lisa Stutz, the director for the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. This morning's program, our gracious volunteer Terri will be presenting on the Pony Express. But before I turn it over to Terri, I just wanted to go over a few general housekeeping notes and some announcements. Number one announcement, there was no Pony Express way station along the Arkansas River. Please don't spread that rumor. If you have any, for our general housekeeping notes, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share during the program, please type them into our chat box or the chat box. We will be monitoring that throughout the program, and we will make sure all of your questions get addressed at the end of the presentation. And if you want to test that feature now, please type in, I agree, there was no Pony Express way station along the Arkansas River in there, so we know that you can hear us. As for upcoming events at the museum, we want to invite all of you to join us next Saturday, October 14th, for our Friends of the Museum special tour of the Equine Center in Penrose at 10 a.m. You can find out more information and register for the tour at the museum. Another event next Saturday, October 14th, will be our special walking tour of our oldest cemetery in the area, Greenwood Cemetery. And this tour will be in partnership with the Greenwood Cemetery Committee. The tour begins at 5 p.m. at the cemetery, and no registration is required. On Wednesday, October 25th, the museum will be hosting our next community coffee and conversation at 9 a.m. at the museum with free coffee and donuts. This month's topic, of course, will be on cemeteries in Fremont County. And on Saturday, October 28th at 6 p.m. at the museum, we will be presenting the Marshall Felch Ghost Story, which will be read by Dan Gernard, Ed Norton, Kathy Heron, and Mark Van Rhines. This program will be free to the public and will be a really fun event. And our next genealogy program with Terri will be in person next month on Saturday, November 4th at 1 p.m. Terri will be honoring and discussing our veterans. We will be posting online registration for this program in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Terri.
Good morning, and thank you, Lisa. This morning, we're going to talk about the Pony Express, and I was really excited when I embarked upon this because I didn't know anything about the Pony Express other than it existed. So in digging into it, I found a lot of useful information, a lot of myths that needed to be debunked, and some interesting sideline information. So let's get started. By 1850, thousands had settled in the West. With the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase, the land mass virtually doubled. And by the time that the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, the landmass that belonged to the United States was now from coast to coast. And with Manifest Destiny, people were encouraged to move westward. We also have the gold rush in 1849 that sent vast numbers of people to California. So with that in mind, we have large settlements of population east of the Mississippi River and a large population on the West Coast. But we still have that vast, sparsely settled midsection of the nation. The Homestead Act did not come into being until 1864, so the midsection was not prominently settled. So how did people get their mail? The post office actually started during the Second Continental Congress in 1795, with Ben Franklin being the first postmaster. So mail service did exist, but to get it from the east to the west was very, very difficult. And to have it in a timely manner was also virtually impossible. There were overland stage routes that did take the mail across the nation, and there were steamboats, but the steamboats had to go partially overland, then they had to go through the, either around the Cape at the bottom of South America or go overland through Mexico and Panama. The Panama Canal did not exist at this time. So it took about 8 weeks for letters and information to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. So there were some gentlemen that came up with the idea of a horse relay station. Several of them in 1849 and in the ensuing years came up with various suggestions to use horses and a relay system. But each one of these propositions was defeated by Congress. But somehow in 1860, Mr. Russell, Majors, and Waddell came up with an idea. They already had existing stage lines. So their proposal was that rather than doing the overland mail route, they were going to do a shorter, it was 800 miles shorter than the overland route. They proposed a central route to California. And apparently this idea won over Congress, and they did receive a government contract. They started the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, which is a mouthful. And it's what today we know as the Pony Express. So on April 3rd, 1860, James Randall was the first one to set out from San Francisco, heading east. And he actually took 11 and a half days to make the journey. The documentation as to who started in St. Joseph to move westward is not definitive. It is possibly either Johnny Fry or Billy Richardson that were the first riders to go westward. And they only took, or Johnny or Billy, only took 10 days. So that established the 10-day delivery standard. And here we have a picture. In the upper left, we have Billy Richardson. On his right is Johnny Fry. And in the foreground, we have Charles and Gus Cliff. All four of these gentlemen were Pony Express riders. When the service got kicked off, there were many posters advertising the Pony Express service. 10 days to San Francisco. Letters, if you deposited your letter in New York up to 4 p.m. on Tuesday, it was then forwarded to the Pony Express office for, actually, it went from New York to St. Joseph, and by Wednesday, it left St. Joseph at 11 p.m. This poster is from later. It is from July 1st of 1861. So at this point, the mail actually cost $1 for a half ounce. This was less than initially charged. The Pony Express operated 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. Originally, it cost $5 for a half ounce. So this was extremely expensive. And as we've seen from the poster, it was reduced to $1 for a standard letter. The men went in all kinds of weather. They went 360, well, they went on the Wednesdays and Saturdays of the year, and it didn't make any difference what the weather was. Usually in the winter, because of inclement conditions, it took about 2 days longer, but it's still a lot faster than 8 weeks. So why were St. Joseph and Sacramento chosen? Sacramento was the western terminus, and it was for the most part because the state legislature met there, and they had a very efficient overnight boat service to San Francisco. So distribution could be much more readily accessible. St. Louis, in turn, was kind of an eastern terminus for many of the railroads that covered the north as well as the south and the entire East Coast. So it made connections more readily available. The actual overland trail, the central trail that they used, followed the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails that settlers had previously outlined. And it covered approximately 1,900 miles, which indeed was 800 miles shorter than the overland mail trail that existed prior to this. Here is a map of the route, and you can see the numerous little notations of the stops along the way, and we will be talking about those. The Pony Express covered 8 states, from Missouri, Nebraska, a single stop in Colorado in Julesburg, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, California. And I probably left out one, but it's 8 states in total. The trail was broken up into what they called 5 divisions. And these are the 5 divisions that were labeled. And each one of these divisions had a superintendent. So it's possible not only was someone in your family a rider, but they might have been the Pony Express superintendent for a larger region. This is the St. Joseph Terminus Stables, and it is currently a Pony Express museum. And they have a large collection of information about the Pony Express, some artifacts, etc. And this is the San Francisco, or excuse me, I want to say that, the Sacramento terminus. And across the street from the Sacramento terminus is a small park with a statue for the Pony Express rider. I could find a lot of information about the statue and who the sculptor of the statue was, but I couldn't get any firm commitment or documentation to prove that it was indeed Johnny Fry. But it is interesting to note that even we know the name of Johnny Fry's horse, Sylph, which means the wind. Speed was of necessity. So how did they accomplish this 1,900-mile journey? Along the trail, there were approximately, given different time periods, 153 to 190, what they called relay stations. A horse could go at full gallop for approximately 10 to a maximum of 15 miles. So these stations had to pop up every short period of time. Cover that 1,900 miles, you need 190 relay stations. So the route was composed of two different kinds of stations. There were the smaller relay stations, and there were also larger home stations. And each one of these stations had a station master. And there were also a couple of other support people that might have manned these stations. At each one of these stations, the express rider would change to a fresh horse. And we'll look at the difference between the two types of stations. Here is a listing along that whole 1,900-mile route of the number of stations within each state. By going to the nationalponyexpress.org website and simply entering the state as well as the word stations, you can find out a listing of each one of the stations in these areas. And here, for example, is one of those. We see the map that we've seen before. This is Division 3, kind of in the center of the route. And it lists all of the stations. It only lists 10 of the stations that were in this particular area. Note the names. Some of them are ranches. So, and some of them are, Junction House. So some of these are small all of these are small places. Many of them no longer exist, but others do. So was your person maybe not a rider, but did they own this ranch and they used the ranch as potentially a changeover position? Did they provide horses? Did they provide feed for the horses, a corral for the horses? So just because the riders are famous doesn't mean that there wasn't a whole lot of background support for this undertaking. So the smaller stations were called swing stations or simply relay stations. And their whole purpose was for the rider to change horses. And it was done as quickly as possible. Many of these are the ones that have disappeared. There may be some historical markers along the way, and the National Park Service has documented some of these as well. But little is known about these stations. There's not much left over from them. They might have had a small cabin, or they might have just simply had a corral and a barn to store feed. They were usually in isolated areas and on lonely terrain, especially across Wyoming and Nevada. And they really, because it was just for the rider to change horses, they did not supply food or lodging for the rider. For those, you had to go to a home station. These were usually located at pre-existing facilities like existing stagecoach stops, or at forts. And we'll see some of those forts that might have been along the route. These were established approximately every 70 miles. And this was when the rider actually got the chance to switch. They did offer room and board for the rider. And the rider would wait for the Pony Express rider coming in the opposite direction to then saddle up and switch off the mail and return to his quote unquote home base. This is one of those home stations that still exists today in Hanover, Kansas. There also are few of these, and some of them have been turned into museums and visitor stations. So there was a station keeper, and what was his job? Essentially, it was to make sure that the horses were ready for the incoming riders. And they had a signaling system. They knew approximately when to expect the riders to come in. They would have outposts that would communicate information to them so that they knew a rider was coming in. And their main job was to keep track of what time the rider arrived and what time he departed. The station keepers were also allowed to open one of the mail pouches, and we'll see more about that. The riders. These are our most famous or notable people, and they were frequently very young, under the age of 18. And the reason for that was they had to weigh less than 125 pounds. The horse had to carry the rider, the mail, the saddle, and just one or two other things. So if it was carrying 20 pounds of mail, we're already up to 145 pounds or a little more for the horse. They wore red shirts and blue pants. And as I've said, they swapped out at a major home station approximately every 75 to 100 miles. They rode day and night through all weather, over all kinds of terrain, and through hostile territory. An interesting note is that in terms of that hostile territory, there were some Pony Express riders that were lost to hostilities, but it was the station keepers who were far more vulnerable to attack than the actual riders were. The pay was very good. They got about $25 a week, which, depending on the month, wound up being $100 to $125. It was a lucrative profession for a very young person. Here's a recruitment poster for the Pony Express, explaining what they wanted to do. They were looking for riders to go between St. Joseph and California. Young, skinny, wiry fellows, not over 18, must be expert riders willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred. I said that the riders were allowed to carry, or that the horse also carried a couple of additional things. One of them was a Bible. Each rider was given a Bible to take along with him. He also had to take an oath, and we will see that in a second. And they could only carry the mail, a water sack, and a pistol. So it was a pretty bare bones operation. Here is the oath that they had to take. I, give your name, do hereby swear before the great and living God that during my engagement and while I'm an employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell, I will under no circumstances use profane language, that I will drink no intoxicating liquors, that I will not quarrel or fight with any other employee of the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, be faithful to my duties, and so direct all my acts as to win the confidence of my employers. So help me God. And in doing some of the research, I did find where one Pony Express rider killed another one. So a violation of the oath. And while it had a great ideal, in reality, this was rough. These were rough times and rough circumstances, and there were deadlines to meet. The company, the three gentlemen, actually provided 400 to 500 horses and ponies that were located throughout the route. And it was up to the station keepers and their help to maintain those horses. Each rider had what was called a mochila. It's a specially designed saddlebag, and it was designed to carry a maximum of 20 pounds of mail. And we're going to see how it was fit over the saddle. At each corner of the mochila was a small letter-sized packet called a cantina that would actually hold the mail. And interestingly enough, each of those 4 cantinas were padlocked for safety. Only one could be opened by a small station master. The 3 others were only opened at military posts, and these 5 military posts were the main operations. They might have carried some military orders. The news was one of the primary things that was carried by letter in these packets. Here is a mochila. So you can see how we have on the left side, we've got 2 cantinas, and on the right side, we have the matching. And you can see how it fit over the saddle. And each one of them had a little loop so that you could have the lock inserted. The service for the Pony Express only lasted 18 months. So because of that, few letters still exist today. And as I just mentioned, newspapers relied heavily on these deliveries. And we'll see some of the news clippings that were captured during this time. Here is an example of an existing letter that is bound for New York, but it's starting in San Francisco, leaving on the 29th of September. It arrived in St. Joseph, Missouri on October 10th, and it left on October 11th from St. Joseph to eventually get to New York. Each one of the letters carried a 10-cent stamp on them, which I thought was interesting. Here are some of the Pony Express newspaper articles. The Overland Pony Express is a triumph. It arrived on schedule at Carson City on Thursday in 9 days from St. Joseph, Missouri, bringing 11 days later news than by the overland mail. And with dates down to the 3rd of this month. So we're getting an idea of how valued the speed was. So down at the bottom, but hooray for the Pony Express now, for it is the great achievement of the day. And this was just when it was getting started. A little while later, the Pony Express took an equivalent of 260 half-ounce letters, a great gain on the preceding express. Merchants will be forced to patronize the Pony Express altogether soon in order to keep pace with the times. So within the first month, it was being lauded in the Western papers. I mentioned that it carried the news, and here is an article that shows that it's reporting a fight with the Indians in the Carson Valley, the whites defeated with great loss. Tremendous excitement in California. So the news was so important. Later that year, we see orders have been issued by the War Department to commanders of the Western Department to furnish all aid in their power to the Pony Express. There were Indian uprisings during this time, so that was one reason that the War Department was called out. And here is a letter to the editor from Mr. Russell, who was the president of the Pony Express at the time. From a dispatch in your issue of yesterday, some of the patrons of our Express are led to believe that the company had determined to withdraw the Pony. And he goes on to say that our mail contract has been extended. So even as late as December of 1860, he's still saying that the contract has been extended, the Pony Express will go on. President Lincoln was elected, and the news went to the West by Pony Express. And finally, with the demise of the Pony Express in 1861, we see a review of how it came into being, and praise for the Pony Express and how it has served. And this is from Pennsylvania. So even those in the East were very much influenced by this new system. So what caused the demise of the Pony Express? It only existed for 18 months. The construction of the telegraph began 2 months after the Pony Express started. So it was fully connected by 1861. The Pacific Telegraph Company headed west from Nebraska. The Overland's Telegraph Company built lines from the east or from California eastward, and they were connected in October. And 2 days later, the Pony Express ended. The telegraph enabled news, especially, to go across the nation in a matter of minutes. Another reason that the Pony Express fell by the wayside was the cost. They never actually did show a profit. They were government contracts, and they were subsidized by the government. The owners eventually did declare bankruptcy, but they didn't fare too badly, as they had existing stagecoach lines, and they had the mail service temporarily returned to shipping. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. So there again, the mail service went to the railroad. So during those 18 months, they operated on Wednesdays and Saturdays. There were 308 complete runs from St. Joseph to Sacramento, with 616,000 miles covered, 34,000, almost 800 letters delivered. And during that time, only one mochila was lost, which is pretty good rate, pretty faithful mail service. So let's look at some of the people that we know about in terms of the Pony Express. 11-year-old Charlie Bronco Miller was the youngest rider. And in doing some of the research, I also discovered that he didn't die until 1955. He was the last surviving Pony Express rider. So while he retired from the Pony Express probably as a 12-year-old, he went on to have a career and live until 1955. He was well into his 90s. The oldest rider was Major Howard Egan, and he was the superintendent of one of those divisions. He was required to fill in as a substitute, and he was 45 years old when he made the ride for a 75 to 100 mile distance. Buffalo Bill Cody. He actually claimed to have been a Pony Express rider, but for the most part, that claim has been debunked. However, he did an awful lot. He was the best advertiser for the Pony Express because in his Wild West shows, he romanticized the role of the Pony Express rider. And we see this is an advertisement for one of his shows, and it's for the Rough Riders, not the Pony Express riders, but he did include the Pony Express riders as part of his show. So where can you find information about the Pony Express? There is a national association for the Pony Express, and in St. Louis, or St. Joseph, there is a national museum. The National Park Service also has a lot of information about the Pony Express, the trail, as well as information about each one of the stations. There are many, many books. And if you want to go to original documentation, there are the government mail contracts from both 1860 and 1861 for the Pony Express. Here is the cover page for the National Pony Express Association. And from that page, you can get a list of the riders. The numbers that are on the left-hand side, there's an extensive bibliography at the end. There are 12 resources, and that's what the numbers refer to, the resources that were used to document the fact that each one of these men was indeed a rider. And here we see 7 of those 12. So this is where the information is coming from. And this is from that website. So we've talked a little bit about the riders, and you can access a list of the riders from the National Pony Express Association. But there were all the other people that worked for the Pony Express. The superintendents. The general superintendent was appointed, and it was Benjamin Franklin Ficklin, and he served for the whole 18 months that the Pony Express was in service. Took a little bit of digging, but the 5 superintendents can also be identified. Messrs. Lewis, Slade, Bromley, Egan, and Roberts for their routes. Here is the pony, an exhibit for the National Pony Express the National Museum. And you can see what kinds of artifacts and information that they have. The National Park Service does have information about the trail, and they have a wonderful, they've made it available online and it's downloadable, a wonderful publication. Oops. So let's think about your connection. Did one of your ancestors simply live along the route? Were they ranch owners? And was the ranch probably or possibly a Pony Express stop? So while they may not have been a rider, they might have supplied something to the riders. Did they supply the support services? Were they a superintendent, one of those 5 gentlemen? Were they station personnel? Usually there were 2 agents, a station keeper, and 1 assistant. So there might have been 4 persons, even at the small stations. Did they provide stock? Did they take care of horses? Did they feed the horses? Did they supply the feed for the horses? Were they saddle makers or the mochila makers? Did they actually construct the station? Many of them had just simple small cabins. Oops. So let's look at the 1860 census. The Pony Express could not have been founded at a more advantageous time from 1860 to 1861, when a census did capture the information. In Ancestry, I happen to use the keyword function for Pony Express, express riders, and station keepers to try and locate some of the information. You need to corroborate the information against either the known list of riders or other resources if the person was a station keeper or some other function. And the reason for that is that if it says specifically Pony Express, then you know that's true. But there were stagecoach lines and there were other mail lines. So to know that they were specifically Pony Express, you need to corroborate the information. So here we have, I need to check because of small handwriting. We have Mr. William Finney down at the very, very bottom there. It's blown up, and he is an agent for the Pony Express. And through some research through the National Park Service, I was able to verify that, yes, indeed, he truly was a Pony Express agent. And it says he was an agent for the Pony Express. It specifically states it, not another mail service. Here is another one where we have mail agent, COCPP Express. If you remember from one of our first charts, that was the actual name of the company, the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express. So if you see those initials, you know that you are talking about Pony Express. We see to Myrick, probably, no, excuse me, those are nailers. We see to Mr. Myrick, who specifically states a Pony Express rider. We see the nailers, maybe brothers, probably brothers, who are blacksmiths. Were they in some way associated with the Pony Express? We've got a whole listing here at a specific location in Salt Lake City. They might have been farriers. They might have manufactured the horseshoes for the Pony Express. So just because your person wasn't a rider doesn't mean that they didn't in some way contribute. Here is another one, Mr. Robert Hashem, a Pony Express rider. And it's interesting to see where all of these people came from. Some of them, he's from London. Many of them were immigrants or definitely from other states. Here is one where verification and corroboration needs to be confirmed. We have a station keeper, Mr. Sevier, and he indeed was a station keeper for the Pony Express. And we see with the ditto marks, express riders. We see the listing. And each one of these gentlemen does appear in the documented Pony Express list of riders. And as I mentioned, see where they're from. We see New York, Scotland, England, Illinois, Ireland. So this is an entire page with information. In the top here, we do see again, we see that Pikes Peak and California COC. So that is definitely Pony Express. And we see some people. We have a station keeper in Kearney, Nebraska. Here is a simple one from various stations. And this is where, because it just says station keeper and rider that verification is needed. But we have multiple stations, so check the list of stations. Rush Valley Station, Simpson Creek Station, Dugway, Fish Springs, and Willow Springs. So we have a whole series of stations listed. And as I've mentioned, we have station keepers, station hands, and we have simply a listing of a mail carrier. So we don't know for 100% sure whether it is a Pony Express rider. And I do believe that I verified that he is, but this is a case where you need to double check. We get the information in the second line. We've got Mr. R.A. Wright. He is the stage agent. Now, that says a stage agent. It may not necessarily be associated with the Pony Express, but on the very next line, we see PP Express and California Stagecoach Station. So eating and boarding house. So this might have been one of the larger home stations, and it would require verification that each one of these people might have been associated. We also see, and we see a stage driver, probably not a Pony Express person because it's a stage. And some of these places did accommodate both the mail as well as stage coaches. So beware, do further research. Israel Landis is listed in the 1860 census as a saddle maker. He is indeed the one in St. Joseph, Missouri, who made the mochillas. There may have been others. I personally have not been able to document others that made mochillas, but Israel definitely is one of, he is credited with the design and making of them. The National Park Service, not only do they document the trail of the Pony Express, they have a very good study. It's actually a multiple, it's more than 100 pages book, a resource study on the trail. It gives a general history at the beginning, and it does talk about briefly at least 184 of the stations that they have been able to identify during the 18-month period of the Pony Express. It's heavily footnoted with references to other sources, and there is an extensive bibliography at the end. And in using this, that was one of the ways that I identified a lot of the station keepers, and in some cases where incidents occurred at a Pony Express stop. That's where it was documented that one rider killed another rider. Here is a copy of that document, and it is downloadable from the National Park Service website. And what they've done is they've divided the chapters into the 5 divisions. The first one at the top is Division 1, then we have Division 2, and you'll see the listing of all of the stations that they have been able to document through each one of the states. And then if you go to the respective pages, you will see information about each one of the stations, how they were documented, and there are the footnotes at the bottom of the page. And as I mentioned just now, this is where I found actual station keepers and station hands are mentioned in some of these reports. And here is some of the bibliographical information, the sources that they used in order to document the information that they are providing. It's a wonderful resource. So while we've talked about the riders, was it possible that one of your ancestors might have performed a supporting role for the Pony Express? We've talked about, did they provide livestock, feed, corrals? Were they blacksmiths? Did they shoe the horses? Were they farriers? Did they provide saddles and tack? Did they man one of those small stations or one of the home stations? And because there is the myth that there was a Pony Express station here, don't discount your ancestor that might have worked for the U.S. Postal Service, the Overland Mail Service. The Pony Express was succeeded by the Butterfield Overland Mail. Were some of your people, did they run stagecoach lines? Were they drivers on stagecoaches? So while the Pony Express is a unique organization, your people may have made as valuable a contribution through the other services. So dig into them. So with that, we'll see. I'm getting a signal that there are not any questions this morning, but I thank you for your time and your interest, and hopefully you might discover a Pony Express or some other valuable information about one of your ancestors. As Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the program, November 4th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I will be doing a live presentation on veterans records, honoring those who served. And if you would please register through the museum so that we can have copies of handouts for you. And we might just turn it into a festive occasion. We want to honor those who served. Thank you so much.